On the 4th of October 1967, the tiny village of Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia is about to have a night it will never forget. Unusual lights spotted by multiple witnesses and a crash into the harbour itself is only the beginning of the strangeness. It's a night so strange, in fact, that it'll end up having its own Royal Canadian Mounted Police X-File. This time, it's the case known as Canada's Roswell. It's the Shag Harbour UFO. Let's get weird.
The history of mankind is riddled with the weird and the wonderful. Bizarre people, strange places, and odd events. For centuries, we've told each other fantastic stories around campfires and in darkened rooms. Tales of ghosts, UFOs, and conspiracies. But are these stories exactly that? Stories? There's only one way to find out. Dive into the rabbit hole and enter Marc W. Shako's Weird World.
Hello and welcome to Marc W. Shako's Weird World, and this time we're looking into one of my all-time favourite UFO cases, the Shag Harbour UFO. Whenever a big UFO case comes along, naturally, it gets compared to the granddaddy of them all, the Roswell incident, surely to feature in an episode of its own at some point sooner, rather than later before you ask. But, in my humble opinion, not many are as worthy of such a name as Canada's Roswell. Let's get into this. Barrington, Shelburne County, is home to a host of small villages. The small fishing community of Shag Harbour is just one of them. Sitting on the south shore of Nova Scotia in the Barrington Passage, the population of roughly 400 to 450 gets most of its income from lobster fishing. It's the 4th of October 1967, and one such fisherman, Laurie Wickens, is driving home with a group of friends from a dance. It's some time after 11 p.m, the mood is relaxed, and the group are in high spirits when, off in the distance, Laurie spots unusual lights. He alerts his friends and a discussion breaks out as to what exactly the lights are. They're moving low above the surface of the waters of the harbour, and the first thought is they're witnessing a plane. That's when the mood quickly changes because it's clear that this plane is in trouble. Because of the natural landscape, they lose sight of it over a hill, but when they top that hill, they do so just in time to see a bright flash as the plane crashes into the murky waters of the harbour. Laurie and friends rush to a nearby payphone and call the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. At first, the claims of a group of people on the way back from a dance are dismissed, but when other calls start flooding in, the RCMP sit up and take notice. The RCMP conduct interviews with local residents who have gathered at the scene, drawn from their homes by the commotion. The reports are similar to those of Laurie Wickens and his friends. Some report a whistling similar to the sound a falling bomb makes and air disturbances. Laurie himself says he and his friends had a good view of things from their higher vantage point, and they saw a yellow light above the surface of the water which vanished into the flat calm of the harbour. The other witnesses believe they too have been witness to a plane crash, although there was something different about this, something odd with the way it vanished beneath the surface. The reports taken are that a craft around 60 feet long with 4 or 5 orange lights has crashed into the bay. As is customary in such incidents, the RCMP get in touch with local fishermen, asking for their help in the search and rescue efforts. The fishermen quickly take to the waters expecting to find fire, wreckage and bodies. But if the evening in the town of Shag Harbour wasn't strange enough, reports filtering in from different sources nearby reveal that the strangeness that night is just beginning. At 7:15 p.m. that same evening, Air Canada Flight 305 to Toronto was flying over Sherbrooke and St. John, Quebec at an altitude of 12,000 feet, when First Officer Robert Ralph pointed out to Captain Pierre Charbonneau there was something strange out the left side of the craft. In his report, the captain describes an object flying a parallel course a few miles away to the south, but it's what he describes that's interesting. A brilliantly lit rectangular object with a string of smaller lights trailing behind it. Weird? It's about to get weirder. Just 4 minutes later, the pilots notice a sizable but silent explosion near the object. 2 minutes later again, at 7:21 p.m, a second explosion occurred. This one a big white ball-shaped cloud that quickly turned red, then violet, then fading into a blue nebulous cloud around the object. Less than 1 hour later, William Thibault and his brother, employees of Canadian Division of Fairey Aircraft, witnessed two bright objects moving above the clouds, slowly heading in the direction of Shag Harbour. William Thibault reported the sighting to the commanding officer of the Naval Air, estimating the height of the lights between 50,000 and 100,000 feet. Local fisherman Captain Leo Howard Mersey was standing at the wheelhouse of his vessel, the MV Dickerson, when he spotted 4 blips on his radar 16 miles to the northeast. The blips seemed to be stationary. Confused, he looked out through the boat's windows and was stunned by what he saw. An object with 4 bright red lights in rectangular formation close to the water's surface. He wanted someone else on board to verify what he was seeing. The crew were already out on deck watching. As the 18-man crew watched on, Mersey radioed the Rescue Coordination Centre and the harbour master in Halifax, asking for an explanation, only to be told there were no military exercises underway that evening. That might have been an end to it if it weren't for the ship's radio picking up reports of UFOs from Halifax to Yarmouth going into the Mounties. When they returned to port, Captain Mersey filed a report with the Lunenburg RCMP outlining the details of his sighting, stating that around 11 p.m, the object, by that time only showing 1 red light, climbed vertically into the sky. In a later interview with Don Ledger, the author of Maritime UFOs, Captain Mersey said that the red light had arced directly over his boat and headed off in the general direction of Shag Harbour. Are we to believe these sightings are merely coincidence? While it is difficult to believe they are not connected with the strangeness in Shag Harbour, there is a chance that the sightings are not of this crashed vehicle, but rather something else. That something else we will come back to later. Back in Shag Harbour, it's been around an hour since Laurie and friends watched the crash. Local fishermen now arrive to the place where witnesses watched the light disappear into the murky depths. What they expected to find is conspicuous by its absence. There are no fires, no wreckage, no bodies. What they do find is something highly unusual. It quickly becomes clear that whatever they're searching for is no plane. The air is thick with a smell of sulphur, the source of which is seemingly a 3-inch thick glittery yellow foam some 80 feet wide, stretching half a mile down the sound. The density of the foam and the way it dissipated was unlike any foam the seasoned fishermen have seen before or since. Across the bay a few hours earlier, 12-year-old Chris Stiles was also about to experience something life-changing. He saw the lights over the waters from where he lived, and despite the late hour and chilly October air, he rushed outside to watch the unusual lights. As he watched, he was certain that these were not the lights of a plane. He also got the distinct feeling that he should not be there, a gut feeling that watching this object, whatever it was somehow wrong. He raced back into the house in time to receive a long-distance call from his grandfather over in Shag Harbour. He too had seen the lights. He's convinced that the fishermen aren't looking for a plane, they're looking for a UFO. When the next morning rolls around, the Rescue Coordination Centre, RCC, in Halifax had determined that no aircraft were reported missing. All commercial, private and military aircraft along the eastern seaboard in both New England and the Atlantic provinces were accounted for. On that same morning, RCC Halifax sent a priority telex to the air desk at Air Force Headquarters in Ottawa. The air desk handled all civilian and military UFO sightings. The RCC had to inform them that something had crashed into Shag Harbour, but all conventional explanations, aircraft flares, etc., had been dismissed. It was for that reason the air desk had to label this a UFO report. Another priority telex went from the head of the air desk to the Navy headquarters concerning the UFO report. The recommendation being they mount an underwater search. So, the Navy reach out again by priority telex, asking the Fleet Diving Unit Atlantic to carry out the search. Reporter Ray McLeod writes a story for the local paper, and he's put in touch with a man named Wilfred Eisner, who has an incredible story to tell from the night of the 4th. On the night of the crash, Eisner was burning an old boat along the shore. He took a camera with him to record the moment for posterity. About an hour before the lights vanished into Shag Harbour, he saw the lights and was able to snap a photograph. It soon becomes clear to him that whatever crashed in Shag Harbour is no plane. Through his research, McLeod is pointed in the direction of an Air Force general by the name of Bain. He's shocked to find out that General Bain is the head of a Canadian UFO research project, the equivalent of the US project Blue Book. This next part is from Wikipedia, quote, Project Blue Book was the code name for the systematic study of unidentified flying objects by the United States Air Force from March 1952 to its termination on December 17, 1969. The project, headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, was initially directed by Captain Edward J. Ruppelt and followed projects of a similar nature such as Project Sign, established in 1947, and Project Grudge in 1949. Project Blue Book had two goals, namely, to determine if UFOs were a threat to national security and to scientifically analyze UFO-related data. End quote. Until this point, Ray had no idea that such a project even existed. His research also reveals that RCMP officers saw the light for themselves and went on the record saying as much. Navy divers are called in and they spend the next 3 days searching the bottom of Shag Harbour. The waters are shallow and the currents are strong, but if the currents hadn't taken the craft, they're convinced that whatever crashed should still be there. They search for days with crowds of locals eagerly watching on from the sidelines. The official records state that the search is without success. But witnesses, they say otherwise.
For more spooky strangeness, visit www.markwshako.com. And now, back to the episode.
What witnesses report are jagged pieces of metal being recovered. The official story is that they are simply markers used by the divers to denote areas of interest. While the sightings of jagged metal don't jibe with the official story, eventually the search concludes and the people of Shag Harbour move on with their lives. Well, most of them. Remember 12-year-old Chris Stiles? He would never forget the night of October the 4th, 1967, and as he grew older, he started digging into the events of the night. Chris Stiles spent years researching the incident, and the more he looked into it, he was able to build up a case that didn't fall apart under scrutiny, but actually grew stronger. He was able to dig up military records of the time and get much more information on what actually happened in Barrington Passage. His research finds all of those official telexes we were talking about before. Whether they thought it was alien or not, the authorities themselves thought they were dealing with a UFO, The official paperwork of the time actually shows handwritten notes from officers, one going so far as to underline the word UFO 3 times. Then, one day, out of the blue, Chris gets an anonymous contact calling himself only Harry, claiming involvement in the official search back in '67. Harry said this was a big event and described it as something out of the normal. According to Harry, the object almost hit a plane outside Quebec before crashing into Shag Harbour. Could this be Air Canada Flight 305? Just when Chris thought he'd hit the jackpot, things got better. While the object was beneath the surface, the source claimed it was actually joined by a second craft which tended to it. As the Shag Harbour search was going on, something had been tracked on radar travelling underwater along the coast to the Canadian Forces Station Shelburne, a joint US-Canadian submarine detection base some 30 miles away. When this craft appeared, they moved a flotilla of ships above it. Harry told Chris that they were diving over the UFO for a week, and they confirmed that they saw a second craft aiding the first. Both objects were studied and many pictures were allegedly taken. Using sonar and surroundings, the objects were located and divers were sent down in pairs. Harry told Chris Stiles that debris was recovered, including large clumps of an odd foam-like material. As you can imagine, working on such an unusual mission, tensions between US and Canadian divers were high. One reported exchange had an officer tell arguing divers not to fall out over a Russian submarine. The diver turned around and told him, "I don't know what that goddamn thing is down there, but it's no submarine. It isn't anything from this planet. You can say whatever you want. We know what we've seen." Another witness came forward with knowledge of something happening in the Shelburne area. Terry was a retired Air Force officer. He was on training in Port Hawkesbury, Nova Scotia, when he was given orders to fly special missions from Maine to Shelburne. The mission was dropping sonar buoys. It lasted 7 days and then suddenly stopped. When crews were overheard joking with one another, orders were given in no uncertain terms that they should not discuss dropping sonar equipment with anyone and to keep their mouths shut. Witness Terry said he'd never known missions handled in such a heavy-handed manner, this despite routinely intercepting Russian submarines. It's rare to find a UFO case with so many reported witnesses. I like these cases with multiple witnesses or mass sightings because it's much harder to write off. If it's a lone witness, then the old shouts of "what were you drinking" come out. Here we've got a whole load of townsfolk, independent sightings from fishing crews, police officers and pilots, all reporting something strange going on in Shag Harbour, not to mention the military witnesses coming forward later. There's photographic evidence from the man burning his boat and radar confirmation from the fishing crew. What did the pilots of Air Canada 305 see? And what about the alleged close call? Pilots are notoriously reluctant to come forward for fear of ridicule or worse, being grounded while they go through psychological evaluation. There's a famous case of exactly this happening to an Air Japan pilot I'll no doubt cover in a later episode. Is the close call Flight 305 or another flight altogether? Another thing to think about is that initially nobody was talking about crashing UFOs. The witnesses presumed they were looking at a plane. It's clear something crashed into Shag Harbour on the night of the 4th of October 1967, but what? Some skeptics say it could be one of ours, an experimental craft from here rather than alien technology. It's often said that secret human technology is decades ahead of what we actually get to see. The only counter to that I could make is that the witnesses on Flight 305 and Captain Mersey talked about seeing a huge rectangular craft. In the many years since 1967, would we not have seen such a craft? And just as skeptics might be tempted to write off the military whistleblower's testimony as hearsay, a top-secret RCMP X-file released in 1993 is revealing. It's one simple line towards the end of the discovered document that stands out. Quote, "Perhaps it is like the thing they are looking for down off Barrington Passage or off Shelburne." End quote. From that simple sentence, two things stand out. Like the thing they are looking for implies simultaneous, separate searches being carried out, and the thing means the object they're searching for is not a conventional aircraft. Could this search be what the second team of divers were looking into? I said I'd come back to the multiple sightings from that night. Could it be that some of these sightings were not of the original crashed object, but of the reported second object that came to its rescue? Just before we finish, listen to this. Half a mile to the north of Shag Harbour sits Woods Harbour. The Cameron family from Woods Harbour filed a UFO report with the RCMP on October the 11th, 1 week after the Shag Harbour incident. The Camerons were watching TV when suddenly the picture was overtaken by interference. When Mr. Cameron went to the window to look for a cause, he saw a string of bright red lights in a straight line about 3/4 of a mile away, some 500 to 600 feet above the water. The entire family watched as these 6 lights flashed back and forth in sequence. The lights were stationary for around 8 minutes and then they disappeared. When they reappeared, there were only 4 lights which descended towards the horizon, changing from red to yellow and then to orange. The lights then vanished. When he spotted the lights again an hour later, Mr. Cameron said they were moving faster than any plane. He thought the RCMP might be interested because the lights appeared so close to the water, they might have emerged from it. With the multiple eyewitnesses on the ground and in the air, physical evidence in the strange foam reported by the fishermen, whistleblower testimony backed up by the official X-Files confirming searches taking place in 2 separate locations, it's easy to see why the Shag Harbour incident has been christened Canada's Roswell. That's all from me. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep it weird. The intro music is Slasher by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio, check out his YouTube channel. The outro music is Lone Wolf by Guillaume Bernard. Please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review and share this episode wherever you may have heard it. And you can find me on Facebook and X as Marc W. Shako. For more information on my books and all things podcasty, visit www.markwshako.com. Thanks for listening.